The man in every first landing, Elise Marlow, froze the image at 400% magnification. The photograph had been taken more than 2 centuries earlier, during one of humanity's first landings on another world. Most of it showed what Elise expected: 6 explorers in pressure suits, a low equipment card, a horizon bleached white by salt, and the dark stone frame that had brought the old archive back under review. The man in the far corner did not belong there. He stood half-turned toward the camera, close enough for the scanner to resolve the lines of his face. A narrow scar crossed the skin beside his left eyebrow. A dark birthmark curved below his right ear. Elise looked at the appointment list on the second screen. Jonah Kessler, flight candidate. Interview scheduled for 10 that morning. The face in his medical file was the face in the photograph. Elise did not call anyone yet. Resemblance was not proof, and archives were full of coincidences that became miracles only after someone stopped checking them. She opened the original scan, the chemical record of the image plate, and the custody log that followed it from the landing site to the Central Museum. No unexplained gap appeared. The photograph had been copied many times, but the physical plate had remained sealed for more than 190 years. She enlarged the man's left eyebrow. The scar matched Jonah's intake photograph. She enlarged the area below his right ear. The birthmark matched too. Elise leaned back and stared at the old face. Then she opened the other 5 landing records. The same man appeared in every one. The 6 missions had taken place across more than 200 years. They had reached different worlds under different administrations, using different suits and different cameras. Yet the same face stood near the same kind of stone frame in all 6 images. He wore different clothing in each picture. In one, his boots were clean. In another, white dust covered them to the ankle. In a third, his right sleeve was torn. In a fourth, the tear had been covered by a bright patch. His posture changed too. He looked alert in one image, tired in the next, and exhausted in the last. He did not look 200 years older. He looked several days older. Elise locked the files and called archive security. "I need the original landing plates isolated," she said. "All 6. No network copies until we verify their custody histories. I also need the emergency release assembly from the first landing exhibit brought to the verification room." The security officer on the line paused. "Why?" "Because someone scheduled to enter this building today appears in 6 historical photographs." Another pause. "Is that a joke?" "No. That is why I'm asking you to verify it before anyone decides what it means." By 9:30, the quiet archive floor had become a controlled area. 2 security officers stood outside the verification room. A museum courier arrived with the old release assembly inside a clear transport case. Technicians examined the 6 physical image plates under separate scanners. Elise watched each authentication result turn green. No digital alteration. No déplacement plate. No break in custody. At 9:58, Jonah Kessler arrived for his interview. He entered wearing a dark jacket and carrying a thin folder under one arm. He was taller than Elise had expected, with the compact build of someone trained to work in narrow mechanical spaces. He looked toward the sign for candidate processing, then toward the 2 security officers waiting beside Elise. "Jonah Kessler?" she asked. "Yes. My name is Elise Marlow. I work with the Historical Mission Archive. Your interview has been delayed. I need you to come with me." His attention moved from her face to the officers. "Am I in trouble?" "I do not know yet." It was the most honest answer she had. Inside the verification room, Elise closed the door and turned the first image toward him. "Do you recognize anyone in this photograph?" Jonah studied the landing team, the white plane, and the equipment card. Then he saw the man by the stone frame. His expression changed so quickly that Elise knew he had recognized the face before he spoke. "That looks like me." "Look closer." She enlarged the scar. Then the birthmark. Jonah touched the side of his neck without seeming aware that he had done it. Elise placed the next image beside the first, then the third, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth. For several seconds, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "I have never seen these. All 6 have been authenticated. That is not possible. I agree that it should not be possible." He looked from one photograph to the next. "When were they taken?" across more than 2 centuries. Jonah's face lost what color remained in it. "I have never left Earth," he said. "Not once." The statement was not defensive. It sounded like a fact he needed the room to hold still. Elise opened his travel and training record. "Your file supports that." "Then either those pictures are wrong or my file is." "The pictures are real. Your file appears real." "That is the problem." One of the security officers stepped forward. "We need a biometric comparison." Jonah turned toward him. "You think I planted myself in museum records before I was born?" "I think we have 6 unexplained appearances connected to a candidate who entered a restricted facility today. Until we understand that, we verify everything." Jonah looked at Elise. "And if I refuse?" "Then you leave with the question unanswered, and security treats the refusal as relevant." He considered that, then placed his right hand on the scanner. The system compared his prints with his identity file first. The match was immediate. Then the technician lifted the old emergency release assembly from its case. The device had been recovered after the historic landing incident, preserved because one print remained clear beneath the protective rim of the manual lever. The scanner read the old mark. The room became silent. "Match confirmed, Jonah Kessler." Jonah stared at the result. "That device is older than my grandparents' grandparents." "Yes," Elise said. A low tone sounded through the wall. Every person in the room turned toward it. The tone came again, deeper this time, followed by a vibration that Elise felt through the floor. A message appeared on the wall display. "Test chamber alert. Stone frame response detected." For years, the ancient frame beneath the center had remained inert while researchers sent power through it, scanned it, heated it, cooled it, and filled entire libraries with theories about what it had once done. Now it had reacted for the first time. The message added one line. "Biological collision, Jonah Kessler." Jonah looked from the alert to the 6 photographs. "You brought the frame online when I walked in?" "No," Elise said. "It activated when your print was confirmed." Security moved to escort him away from the archive level, but Jonah did not move. "You cannot lock me in a room and decide what I am without me," he said. "If that thing knows my name, I want to see every piece of evidence you have." The senior officer frowned. "You are now part of an active security event. I was part of it 200 years before I was born. That gives me more reason to be there, not less." Elise looked at the 6 images again. The dust, the torn sleeve, the patch, the growing exhaustion. They were not 6 unrelated appearances. They were a sequence. "Let him come," she said. The officer looked at her. "On what basis?" "On the basis that the frame has ignored every machine we sent near it and responded to him. Also, the photographs contain an order that their historical dates do not explain. If we remove him before we understand that order, we may lose the only chance to learn what has already happened." Jonah gave her a sharp look. "Already happened?" Elise met his eyes. "For the archive, yes. For you, perhaps not." The stone frame stood in a chamber 3 levels below the archive. It was taller than a person and almost twice as wide, made from black material that looked like rock until light moved across it. Then thin lines appeared beneath the surface, curved and layered like rings under dark ice. Researchers had built a platform around it. Cables ran to sensors, power controls, and emergency shutdown stations. None of those systems had made the frame do more than absorb energy and return meaningless heat. As Jonah entered the observation level, the rings brightened. Security immediately moved him back. The light faded. He stepped forward again. The rings returned. "It is tracking distance," one technician said. "No," Elise replied, holding up the first photograph. "It is tracking a position." In every image, Jonah stood close to a stone frame. The angle changed, but his distance from it remained almost the same. The senior security officer, Commander Vale, ordered the chamber sealed. "We take Kessler off-site. We shut the frame down." "You may not be able to," Elise said. "We have physical power isolation." The frame began responding before the research grid increased output. It may be drawing from stored energy or from somewhere else in the network. Vale's expression hardened. "That is an argument for removing the unknown variable." Jonah looked at the frame. "You mean me?" "At the moment, yes." Elise placed the 6 images on the main display. Before you remove him, look at the boots. Vale did not hide his impatience, but he looked. Elise enlarged the first image in the sequence she had begun to build. Jonah's boots were clean. In the next image, pale residue covered the soles. In all later images, the same residue remained trapped in the seams. Then she showed the sleeve. Hole in the first image, tore in the next, patched in those that followed. The photographs are arranged by their dates in the archive, she said. That order makes no physical sense. His clothes repair themselves, tear again, and lose dust that later returns. But if we ignore the dates and follow the changes on his body and clothing, they form one continuous journey. She moved the images into a new line. First, the white salt plain. Second, a wall of black cliffs. Third, a low valley marked by bands of water. Fourth, a camp of pale domes. Fifth, a high plain glittering with glass-like dust. Last, the landing where the emergency release assembly had been recovered after an unexplained loss of personnel. Jonah watched the new order appear. You are turning photographs into instructions, he said. Not instructions. Evidence of consequences. The dust must come from somewhere. The tear must happen before the patch. The fatigue must accumulate. And because the pictures show me doing it, you think I should walk into that frame and make them true? No, I think the frame may already be trying to start whatever produced them. We need to know whether refusing it is safer than understanding it. That sounds like the same thing with better grammar. Elise accepted the criticism. It might be. A technician rolled a small probe toward the frame. It carried a camera, environmental sensors, and a tether thick enough to pull it back if the opening became unstable. The inner rings brightened as the probe crossed the platform. For 1 second, the space inside the frame turned white. The probe vanished into the opening, then shot out behind the frame almost immediately and struck the floor. Its camera had recorded only static, and the tether had never crossed the threshold. Then Jonah took one involuntary step toward the platform. The frame filled with a clear image of a white plain beneath a pale sky. Everyone saw the same dark stone structure standing in the distance. The first photograph. Jonah stopped. The image weakened, but did not vanish. Elise felt the shape of the problem settle into place. The probe is not part of this route. You are. I did not volunteer for that route. I know. He looked at the 6 photographs. Do you? Because everyone in this room is talking as if the pictures are orders from the future. They are not orders, Elise said. They are records. A record can show that an action occurred. It cannot make the choice for the person who took it. That is easy to say when you're not the person in the record. The frame pulsed. A short tone sounded from the chamber monitors. Then it repeated after a pause. Elise turned toward the wave display. The signal was simple. One rise, one fall, then silence. A technician adjusted the scale. It appeared when the frame aligned with the salt site. Mark it, Elise said. The frame shifted. For a moment, it showed the black cliffs instead. The tone did not return. When the white plane reappeared, the same short pulse sounded again. It is acknowledging a correct connection, she said. Vale folded his arms. Or baiting us. We do not know enough to call it either. But it gives us a way to tell whether the route remains active. Jonah stepped closer to the display of photographs. What happened at the final landing? Elise opened the incident. Summary. A temporary field failure occurred near the stone frame. Several members of the landing team disappeared. The official conclusion was personnel and equipment loss during an unknown energy event. The emergency release was found engaged afterward. With my print on it. Yes. And in your order, that is the last place I go. Yes. Vale spoke before Jonah could answer. This is exactly why the test ends now. He ordered the research grid disconnected. Technicians cut the first power feed. The frame remained lit. They cut the second. The image of the white plane sharpened. The chamber alarms began to rise. Air rushed across the platform toward the opening. Loose straps lifted, and a sheet of paper slid from a console and struck the transparent wall. It is forming a pressure gradient, a technician shouted. Jonah backed away, but the pull strengthened. Vale ordered the emergency doors closed around the platform. One door descended halfway and stopped as its sensors lost alignment. Elise grabbed a communication unit and ran to the chamber access. "What are you doing?" Vale demanded, giving him something that may work on the other side. "He is not going to the other side." The platform rail bent inward with a deep metallic groan. Jonah caught it with both hands. His folder vanished into the frame without touching the floor. Elise reached the edge of the chamber and threw the communication unit toward him. Jonah released one hand, caught it against his chest, and locked the strap around his wrist. "The white plane comes first," she called. "If you arrive there, find the stone frame and the camera position. Do not assume the brightest opening is the correct one. Follow the physical changes in the photographs." Jonah's grip slipped several inches along the rail. "That is your plan?" "It is the only evidence we have." He glanced back at the white opening. "And if the evidence is wrong, test the consequences." That is what you would do in a field failure. For the first time since entering the chamber, something in his expression settled. It was not acceptance. It was training. Jonah stopped pulling directly against the force. He shifted his body sideways, lowering his center of gravity and turning toward the stable center of the opening. The rail tore free. Instead of being dragged backward, he pushed off the platform and aimed himself through the brightest steady section. Elise heard the communication unit crackle. Then Jonah vanished. The opening collapsed to a thin line. The chamber went still. On the monitors, the short response pulse sounded once. Vale stared at the empty platform. "Shut it down." "Not yet," Elise said. "Kessler is gone. The response is still active. That does not prove he is alive." "No, it proves the route has not ended. If we destroy the connection now, we may make sure he never comes back." Vale looked at the power readings, then at Elise. "You have 10 minutes to show me something better than a pulse." Far from the chamber, Jonah struck hard ground and rolled across a crust of white salt. He lay still for one breath, then another. The sky above him was pale blue, and the air smelled dry and mineral. His communication unit hissed with static. A dark stone frame stood 20 yards away. Beyond it, a group of explorers were arranging equipment around a camera mast. Their suits were old designs Jonah knew only from training museums. One of them turned and saw him. "Where did you come from?" Jonah pushed himself to his feet. The explorer's camera rotated toward the landing team, and the group began moving into position for a wide image. Jonah recognized the angle. He looked toward the place where the unknown man had stood in the first photograph. It was exactly where he was standing now. He stepped away. The stone frame behind the landing team dimmed. He moved farther from the camera's field. The frame went dark. His communication unit crackled, and Elise's voice broke through in fragments. "Jonah, signal, frame response falling." "I can't hear you," he said. "Barely. Are you the white site?" "Yes. The landing team is here. The camera is here. I'm standing where I was in the photograph." Then the photograph was not showing someone who arrived before you. It was showing this moment. Jonah looked at the explorers. They were waiting, uncertain whether he was part of their operation or a threat. He could remain outside the image and refuse to give the archive the evidence that had brought him here. But the dark frame had already shown him the consequence. Without his position near it, the next connection did not form. One of the explorers raised a hand. "Sir, we need you clear of the equipment." Jonah looked at the camera, then at the stone frame. "I'm trying," he said. He walked back to the exact patch of salt beside the frame. The inner rings came alive. The camera captured the landing team. At the far corner of the image, Jonah Kessler stood with clean boots and an expression the archive would preserve for more than 200 years. A moment later, wind drove white salt across the plain. It coated his boots and settled into the seams. At the center, Elise saw a faint audio trace return. "The picture was taken," Jonah said. She closed her eyes for 1 second. The first question was answered. The man in the photographs was not a copy, an ancestor, or an error. It was Jonah. "The next frame is forming," he said. Across the salt plain, the dark structure filled with an image of black cliffs. "Elise, if I do this, am I choosing anything? Or am I only following marks that already exist?" She looked at the 6 photographs. The images showed where he had stood. They did not show every hesitation, every judgment, or every reason. The archive knows the result, she said. It does not know what each decision cost you. Jonah gave a short, humorless breath. That is not an answer. It is the only honest one I have. He looked toward the black cliffs inside the frame. Then he stepped through. The black cliffs rose on both sides of Jonah like broken walls. He emerged on a narrow shelf of stone. Several ancient frames stood along the cliff face, each one dark until he moved toward it. Then 3 of them brightened at once. Near the edge of the shelf, a weathered survey mast turned toward him. Its casing carried the faded emblem of the second landing mission. Jonah recognized the camera angle from the second photograph. The lens flashed while he stood beside the frames. White salt covered his boots, but his right sleeve was still whole. The opening on his left showed the white chamber at the center. Elise stood beyond it, small but clear, one hand pressed her headset. "I can see you," Jonah said. Her voice came through without static. "Do not enter the brightest frame yet. It is the center. It looks like the center. That is not the same thing." The frame ahead showed a low valley crossed by shining water. Another showed only gray light. Jonah moved toward the opening to the center. The communication signal weakened after 2 steps. At the center, Elise watched the response pulse flatten. "Stop," she said. Jonah stopped. Her voice nearly vanished. He stepped back. The short pulse returned. "The route is rejecting it," Elise said, "or warning me away from home. Look for a mark carried from the first site, something the correct frame would recognize." Jonah lowered his eyes. White salt had collected in the deep tread of his boots. Wind had blown a thin trail of it across the black rock. The trail curved toward the frame, showing the tidal valley. Near its base, a shallow groove held a few grains identical to the salt in his boots. When he stepped closer, more grains fell from the tread and completed the pale streak. The opening to the center remained brighter and more inviting. Jonah approached it once more, this time only far enough to test the effect. The response pulse disappeared completely. He retreated, and it returned. No voice explained the rule. The pulse vanished when he approached the wrong frame and returned when he stepped back. That consequence was enough. "I cannot skip this place," he said. "It appears that way. You always make terrible news sound polite. It is an archival skill." The answer surprised a brief laugh out of him. The sound eased something in Elise's chest that she had not admitted was tight. Jonah crossed the shelf toward the salt-marked frame. A sharp edge caught his right sleeve and tore the outer fabric from wrist to elbow. The pressure layer beneath remained intact. He looked at the rip. "There is the next photograph." "Yes. I'm beginning to dislike how useful those images are. They are beginning to keep you alive." He stepped into the valley. Opening. The response pulse sounded a second time at the center. Vale stood behind Elise with his arms folded. 2 pulses. No proof of a return route. "The first image was created exactly where the archive said it would be," Elise replied. "The second connection followed the physical sequence in the photographs. That is proof of structure. Structure can still lead to a dead end. So can shutting it down?" Vale looked toward the inactive emergency controls. "You are asking me to protect a process that is changing historical evidence while it runs. I am asking you not to cut a rope while someone is still climbing it." On the other side, Jonah entered a shallow valley where broad sheets of water flowed in and out beneath a copper-colored sky. A temporary research station stood on higher ground. 3 explorers were securing containers before the next rise in water. Their suits were newer than those of the salt plain, but still old enough to belong in a museum. A fixed camera above the station gate rotated toward Jonah. He recognized the angle from the third photograph a moment before it flashed, recording the torn sleeve and the salt ground into his boots. One of the explorers saw the damage. "Hold still," she said, approaching with a repair strip. "Your outer layer will catch on everything." "It already has." She pressed a bright patch over the tear and sealed the edges. Jonah stared at it. The color and shape matched the later photographs exactly. The explorer noticed. "You expected that? I hoped I was wrong about it." A warning tone sounded from the station. Water began pushing through a lower channel earlier than the team expected. The explorers moved equipment uphill. Jonah helped lift a power case, but stopped when he saw a small data box floating away from a storage rack. Through the communication unit, Elise heard him say, "There is a container in the water." She searched the valley record. A survey data box was reported recovered after the tide. The log does not say how. The box struck a rock and spun toward deeper water. Jonah could have ignored it. The archive already said it had been recovered. Someone else might retrieve it later. But he was standing within reach. He anchored one foot against the rack, leaned into the current, and caught the box by its handle. Water pulled hard enough to turn him sideways, but he used the rack as a brace and dragged the container onto the higher shelf. The explorer took it from him. "You just saved our surface survey." Apparently someone was going to. Someone did. At the center, a line in the landing record flickered. Elise saw the original wording, "Recovered after tidal event. Method unknown." Then the sentence changed. "Recovered by an unidentified visitor." It returned to the first version, then changed again. "The record is changing," she said. Vale came closer. "Changing how?" Elise opened the protected copy beside the live archive. The protected copy still showed the old wording. The live record alternated between the two. "The route is not finished," she said. "The archive has not settled on a new cause." "You are saying history has not settled." "No, I am saying the evidence is being rewritten while the connection remains open. We are inside the active field, so we still remember the earlier version." Jonah heard enough of the exchange to understand. "I changed the record. You supplied the missing cause," Elise said. "The box was always recovered. Now the archive knows by whom." Jonah looked across the moving water. "So I can change something without erasing everything around it. This was a small action with a result the old record already contained. Do not assume a larger change will behave the same way. I was not planning to rewrite civilization." "Good. I do not have space in the archive for the paperwork." This time his laugh was real. The stone frame above the station brightened. The central monitor answered with a third pulse. Jonah passed through before the tide, reached the high shelf. He arrived inside a camp of white domes under a dim red sun. The camp was already losing power. Lights blinked across the camp. A generator coughed, recovered, then fell to half output. Two crew members rushed past Jonah, carrying sealed instrument cases. For one sharp second, he thought his arrival had caused it. "Elise, the camp is losing power. The historical report says the failure began before the unidentified visitor was recorded." "That visitor was me." "Yes, which means you did not start it." Jonah forced himself to examine the scene instead of accepting blame simply because the timing felt personal. A worn transfer unit beside the generator had overheated. The damage pattern spread outward from old contacts, not from the stone frame. "The converter failed on its own," he said. A camp engineer pulled open a backup panel. "If you know that, help us move the medical storage and navigation core to reserve power." Jonah joined him. He did not repair the entire camp or discover a miracle solution. He carried cables, isolated non-essential loads, and helped the team preserve what mattered until the main unit could be replaced. On the inner panel, 3 symbols lit in sequence around a manual release. Outer ring locked. Pressure relieved. Core released. Jonah stopped. The symbols were nearly identical to the 3 circular marks on the emergency lever preserved in the museum. "Elise, I have a control sequence. 3 steps." He described them. She placed the museum scan beside the image from his wrist camera. The worn markings matched. "Remember the order," she said. "Do not rely on the labels being readable later. Lock the outside. Relieve pressure. Release the core." Again, he repeated it while helping the engineer move the final cable. When the reserve load stabilized, a camp documentation camera swept across the work area. Jonah stood beside the frame with a bright repair patch visible on his sleeve when the lens flashed. The 4th photograph had just been made. The 4th response pulse sounded. The next frame formed beyond the domes, filled with glittering dust. Jonah looked back at the crew. Their failure continued, but their essential systems held. They did not cheer him or ask who he was. They returned to their work because the problem was not over. That felt more honest than being treated like a man written into history for a purpose. He stepped through. The high plane was silent. Fine particles covered the ground, reflecting the sky in thousands of sharp points. Rows of stone frames stood across the plateau, and 5 of them brightened when Jonah approached. A low survey mast, half buried in the glittering dust, woke as he crossed the plateau. Its lens followed him and flashed when he stopped before the row of frames. The 5th photograph caught the bright patch, the accumulated dust, and the exhaustion of several days. His communication unit produced only broken pieces of Elise's voice. Multiple reflections cannot distinguish. Then the channel died. Jonah was alone. The brightest opening showed the center again. Elise stood on the other side, frozen by the unstable signal. Another opening showed the final landing site from the old incident photograph. A third showed darkness. 2 more displayed landscapes Jonah did not recognize. He could not ask Elise which opening belonged to the route, so he stopped looking for the most comforting image. He looked at his own evidence. White salt remained trapped in his boot seams. The sleeve had torn at the black cliffs. The bright patch had been applied in the tidal valley. Those details formed an order his body had already carried through. Then he examined the frames. 3 rings flashed on the opening that showed the final landing. They lit in the sequence from the White Dome camp. Outer, pressure, core. The opening to the center flashed only the 1st and 3rd rings. It was brighter, but incomplete. Jonah approached the final landing frame and touched the 1st ring. It held steady. He touched the 2nd. Pressure moved through the stone with a low breath. He touched the 3rd. The image sharpened. For one instant, the center opening brightened behind him. He saw the chamber clearly. He could have reached it in 2 steps. Then it weakened. Ahead, the final landing site came into focus. Explorers moved near a camera mast. The emergency release stood beside the frame. Jonah understood that the choice he had feared was not theoretical. The route was preparing to put home and the old disaster within reach at the same time. He activated the complete sequence. At the center, Elise heard the 5th response pulse. It lasted longer than the others. She looked at the live archive. The final photograph began to blur at the edges. He found the correct frame, she said. Vale watched the energy graph rise. Or the system is approaching failure. Both may be true. Then we close it before the failure reaches us. Elise turned to him. If you close it now, you remove the last node. Every earlier pulse showed that the route advances only when a node completes. He has 1 left, and while he completes it, records outside this room are changing. A databox entry changed by 1 line. We do not know what the last site will do. That uncertainty is the reason to stop. Elise looked at the 6 photographs. At the beginning, she had trusted them because they were stable. Now the final image shifted under her eyes, and she had to decide whether evidence was still useful before it became certain. At every point, Jonah had to act before the archive could tell us the full result, she said. If we demand certainty first, we are not choosing safety. We are choosing to abandon him. Vale's jaw tightened. You are responsible for this recommendation. I know. He gave the technicians a new order. Hold the frame. 1 final cycle. No more. The long response pulse continued. On the plateau, Jonah stepped into the last opening. He arrived minutes before the recorded field failure. Jonah knew the place from the final photograph. The stone frame stood on a wide shelf of dark ground. A camera mast faced the landing team. The emergency release assembly was mounted beside the frame, its 3 worn rings still clean and readable. The explorers had no idea what was about to happen. 1 technician adjusted a sensor near the inner edge of the frame. 2 others moved cases toward a temporary shelter. Farther away, several crew members checked a survey vehicle. Behind Jonah, a clear opening formed. The center chamber waited on the other side. Elise stood beyond it. Her image shook, but her voice reached him. That is the return path, she said. The signal matches the center. Jonah looked at the opening. He could step through now. If he stepped through now, the old photograph would remain as he had first seen it. The landing team would suffer the recorded loss, and he would return to a world where the archive had accepted that outcome for 2 centuries. Somehow, the emergency release would still acquire his print, but he would never understand how. A warning vibration passed through the ground. The rings inside the stone frame flashed in the wrong order. Third, first, second. Jonah remembered the white dome camp. Lock the outside. Relieve pressure. Release the core. The landing technician beside the frame frowned at his instruments. We have a phase rise. Another answered. The frame has done that before. Not like this. Jonah looked at the people nearest the stone structure. They were not names in an incident summary yet. They were working, arguing, and trying to understand a problem that he understood slightly better than they did. At the start of the day, he had wanted only to prove that he was not responsible for history. He was still not responsible for causing this failure. But responsibility had changed shape. It no longer meant accepting blame for what he had not caused. It meant deciding what to do with the knowledge he now possessed. Jonah, Elise said, the return opening is weakening. He looked back at her. If I stay, can the old record change without breaking everything? The title record changed only where your action supplied a missing cause. This is larger. I cannot promise what happens. Can you promise what happens if I leave? Elise looked toward the old photograph on her display. Yes, she said quietly. The incident remains as recorded. The ground vibrated again. Jonah stepped away from the return opening. Then keep listening for the pulse. He ran toward the landing team. Move away from the frame, he shouted. The release sequence is out of order. The nearest technician turned. Who are you? Someone who has seen what happens next. Get everyone beyond the outer equipment line. Now, the technician hesitated. The frame emitted a hard, rising tone. A loose tool lifted from the ground and struck the side of a case. That was enough. The team leader ordered everyone out of the immediate zone. Jonah pointed toward a shallow depression behind the survey vehicle. At the white dome camp the backup field had, held inside the outer power ring. Here, the stone structure cast a similar protected boundary across the ground. Not there, he said as two crew members moved toward the shelter. The shelter is outside the stable ring. Use the vehicle trench. He did not try to reach everyone across the entire landing site. The distant crews were already beyond the strongest part of the field. His attention stayed on the people closest to the frame, the ones the old record said had vanished. The return opening behind him narrowed. Jonah, Elise warned. I know. He reached the emergency assembly. The rings flashed in the wrong order again. Energy built inside the frame, pressing against the air with a deep mechanical sound. Jonah placed his hand beneath the protective rim. First, he locked the outer ring. The frame's edge darkened, and the unstable field stopped spreading across the landing shelf. Second, he opened the pressure release. A wave of force passed through the ground and vented upward instead of outward. The explorers nearest the vehicle dropped behind its heavy frame. Third, Jonah pulled the core release. The lever resisted. He shifted his stance and pulled with both hands. The old mechanism moved one final inch. The core separated from the frame with a dull impact. His right palm pressed across the inner metal surface. More than 2 centuries later, that print would bring him into the verification room. The remaining energy turned away from the route home and spread around the protected zone instead. The return opening disappeared. For a moment, Jonah saw only the dark reflection of the stone frame. Then the landing camera flashed. It captured him standing beside the emergency release. Behind him, the crew members who had reached the protected trench were rising to their feet. The same photograph had existed in the archive all morning. Now it held more people. The frame began shutting down. One weak opening formed inside it, no longer showing the center clearly. The passage looked narrow, gray, and unstable. Elise. Static answered. Jonah touched the first ring. A faint light appeared. At the center, his signal vanished from the main display. The final photograph, blurred until the figures became pale shapes. Vale moved toward the shutdown control. We have lost him. Close the system before the field expands. Elise stared at the response graph. The 6 pulse had not ended. Instead of dropping to 0, it had stretched into a low, continuous line the same kind of handoff she had seen between earlier nodes. The signal was weaker, but it was still organized. "Wait," she said. "There is no image." The image was never the route monitor. The pulse was. "Marlow, the chamber is at its safety limit. The line is still completing. If we shut it now, we close the final node while he is inside it." Vale looked at the technicians. One of them nodded reluctantly. "The signal is decaying," the technician said, "but it has not broken pattern. Elise facide vale. One cycle. That was the agreement. The cycle has not finished. If the frame damages this facility, it is on you." "Yes." Vale lowered his hand. On the other side, Jonah activated the second ring. Pressure moved through the weak passage. The opening became clearer for half a second, and he saw the center chamber, as if through deep water. The third ring flashed once. He had one chance. If he released the core before entering, the passage would close around him. If he waited too long, the remaining energy would collapse without sealing the route. He listened to the rhythm beneath the stone. It matched the handoff pulse he had heard through the communication unit at each completed point. Rise. Hold. Fall. Jonah pulled the third control at the top of the hold and stepped forward. The passage tightened around him. Cold pressure closed across his shoulders, then vanished. He fell onto the platform at the center. Behind him, the stone frame released one final low tone. The long response line contracted into a single pulse and went flat. The chamber lights returned to normal. For several seconds, no one moved. Then Elise crossed the platform and knelt beside Jonah. His clothes carried white salt, black dust, dried watermarks, and glittering particles from the high plane. The bright repair patch still covered the tear in his sleeve. He looked exhausted but awake. "How long?" he asked. Elise checked the chamber clock. 7 minutes and 41 seconds. Jonah closed his eyes. It was 4 days, maybe 5. Security personnel moved in with medical scanners and isolation equipment. Jonah allowed them to work without argument. Elise looked past him toward the frame. The inner rings were dark. A technician tried the research grid. Nothing responded. "The network is dormant," he said. "Completely. Vali is shaled slavly. Then the activation program is suspended." "Suspended?" Another technician asked. "Cancelled until we understand what just happened. No test schedule. No extraction plan. No attempt to wake it again." The cost of Jonah's choice was not only the lost easy return. The route had closed behind him, taking the center's most ambitious program with it. His planned interview no longer mattered. He would not be leaving the facility as an ordinary candidate. Neither would Elise be returning to an ordinary archive desk. On the wall display, the 6 photographs began to flicker. Elise stood. "Do you remember the originals?" she asked Vale. "Yes." The technicians inside the chamber did too. Everyone who had remained within the active field remembered the same 6 images they had seen before Jonah vanished. Outside the chamber, the archive was changing. The first photograph stabilized. Jonah stood near the frame on the salt plain. The second showed white dust on his boots. In the third, his sleeve was torn. In the fourth, the bright patch covered it. The fifth showed the exhaustion that had grown across several days. Those images remained almost exactly as before. Then the final photograph cleared. Jonah stood beside the emergency release in the same position. His right hand was still on the lever. But behind him, within the protected area, stood 9 members of the landing team who had not been present in the original image. Elise opened the incident record. The old summary remained visible in her protected copy. Multiple personnel lost during unknown field event. The live archive loaded a new version. Field event contained after manual core release. 9 personnel recovered from protected zone. Remaining losses unchanged. The disaster had not vanished. Jonah had not saved everyone. But the people behind him in the photograph had lives after that day. The archive showed later assignments, retirements, families, and ordinary records that had not existed in the version Elise remembered. She did not open all of them. 1 confirmed medical discharge and 1 later mission record were enough to prove that the change was real. Jonah sat up slowly. Did a hold. Elise turned the final image toward him. He looked at the people behind his own recorded figure. For a long moment, he said nothing. Vale stepped closer to the display. Why do we remember the old version? Elise answered once, in the simplest terms she could. We were inside the active field while the record was changing. The archive settled after the route closed. Our memories did not change with it. No one tried to turn the sentence into a grand theory. They had enough facts to manage without pretending they understood time. The investigation lasted for months. Jonah remained under medical observation and then under formal review. He was cleared of fraud almost immediately, but that did not return him to the life he had expected. A man whose biological signature had activated a time-crossing network could not simply resume a standard flight candidate process. He became a required witness and technical participant in every assessment of the dormant frame. Elise faced her own review. Her decision to keep the system open had violated the safest, immediate option. The response data also showed that closing it earlier would probably have trapped Jonah inside the final handoff. She kept her position, but not her old work. The archive created a restricted record under her supervision containing both histories. The original version remembered by those inside the field, and the stable version now recognized everywhere else. She labeled neither history false. One recorded what had been. The other recorded what Jonah's choice had allowed to follow. The stone frame remained silent. No one tried to wake it. Weeks after the final review, Elise and Jonah stood together in the verification room where the mystery had begun. The 6 photographs filled the wall in Jonah's personal order rather than the order of their historical dates. White salt, black cliffs, tidal water, white domes, glass-like dust, the final landing. The details Elise had once treated as evidence against him now formed a record of decisions only he remembered making from inside the journey. She pointed to the last image. When you first saw these, you asked whether they meant you had no choice. Jonah studied the figure beside the emergency release. I remember. What do you see now? He looked from the clean boots in the first photograph to the patched sleeve in the fourth, then to the people standing behind him in the last. For the first time, he said, I see the order of my choices, not the order of history. Elise let the images remain on the wall. Behind them, far below the archive, the ancient frame stayed dark. The photographs had never shown a man trapped by destiny. They had preserved the evidence of choices he had not made yet. The dust on his boots, the torn sleeve, the fingerprint on the release, and the people standing behind him in the final image. What they could not preserve was the moment Jonah understood the cost and chose to act anyway. The ancient frame remained silent, and the 6 photographs returned to the archive. For Jonah and Elise, they were no longer images of an impossible past. They were proof that even a finished record could contain one choice no one understood until it was made.